I married my college sweetheart, Ryan, and for over a decade, I thought we had built a good life together. We had two beautiful 5-year-old twins, a home that felt warm and welcoming, and a routine that kept us busy but content. But there was always something lurking in the background, a tension I could never fully shake off. Most of it stemming from my relationship with Ryan's family, especially his mother, and even worse, his ex-girlfriend Emily. Emily had been a part of Ryan's life long before I came into the picture, and while I initially thought it was admirable that they remained on good terms, I quickly realized that her presence was way more than I had bargained for. She wasn't just a casual acquaintance. She was practically a member of the family. She showed up at every family event, holidays, birthdays, random dinners, and each time, I felt like I was on the outside looking in. My mother-in-law, Diane, never explicitly said she preferred Emily, but the signs were there. She would constantly bring up old memories, laugh about the good old days when Ryan and Emily were together, and somehow, I always ended up feeling like the odd one out. It wasn't just the reminiscing. It was the comparisons, the way she subtly hinted that Emily was more like the daughter-in-law she had imagined. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that Ryan loved me, and that was all that mattered. But the hurt grew with every little comment, every lingering moment where I felt like an outsider in my own family. The last straw came during a family dinner last week. Emily, of course, was invited. Again, as soon as she walked in, I could feel the mood shift. Everyone was more animated, more engaged, as if the real party had just arrived. Throughout the evening, she was laughing with Ryan, sharing inside jokes that left me feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. I tried to stay calm, focusing on my kids, but when Emily leaned over and wiped a bit of sauce off Ryan's face, I snapped. I didn't even think. I grabbed my glass of wine and threw it at her, the deep red liquid spilling across her cream-colored dress in a wide, dramatic stain. For a moment, everything froze. My mother-in-law's gasp echoed in the silence, and Emily sat there, staring down at the mess on her lap in disbelief. Ryan looked at me with a mixture of shock and anger, and when he finally spoke, his voice was cold. "What the hell, Cassie?" He wasn't mad at her for crossing boundaries. He was mad at me for reacting. I stood there, feeling the weight of everyone's stares on me. "I'm done with this," I said, trying to hold back the tears. "I'm tired of being treated like I don't exist, like I'm some placeholder while Emily gets to play the perfect ex." I couldn't hold it in any longer. Before I made more of a scene, I stormed out, leaving them all in stunned silence. As I walked away, the realization hit me hard. No one in Ryan's family had ever really liked me, not in the way they liked her. I had always been the outsider, and that truth hurt more than I could bear. The days following the dinner were tense, to say the least. Ryan barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was clear he was more upset about me embarrassing Emily than about the way she acted. His defense of her only deepened the wound. I felt utterly betrayed, like I was living in a parallel universe where my feelings didn't count. The worst part, though, was my mother-in-law's reaction. She called me the day after the dinner, and I had a brief moment of hope that maybe, just maybe, she was going to support me, acknowledge that Emily's constant presence was inappropriate. Instead, the conversation began with her saying, "I've always tried to be patient with you, but what you did last night was unforgivable." I couldn't believe it. Patient with me? I've had to put up with Emily being at every family gathering for years. I snapped, finally unable to hold back. "It's like you never accepted that Ryan married me, that we have a life together." I've been polite and silent, but I'm done with that. There was a pause on the other end of the line before she coldly responded, "You've always been too sensitive." The phone call ended shortly after that, leaving me feeling more isolated than ever. It was clear to me now that I was never going to be good enough in their eyes. No matter what I did, I would never measure up to Emily, who had seemingly earned permanent VIP status in their family. The feeling of being the outsider was no longer something I could ignore. Ryan and I finally had a conversation that night. It was long overdue. "You embarrassed me," he said, arms crossed, eyes filled with disappointment. "That's not like you, Sarah. What were you thinking?" I wasn't sure whether to cry or scream. "I'm embarrassed," I countered. "I'm embarrassed that you've let her linger in our lives this long, that your family treats me like I'm second best. Emily is not your family anymore, Ryan." "I am." His silence told me everything. It was as though I wasn't worth defending, and that stung deeper than I'd anticipated. How could he not see what was happening right in front of him? "I don't understand why you've let this go on for so long," I continued, my voice quieter now. "It's like I'm fighting to be seen in my own marriage." Ryan let out a deep sigh, rubbing his forehead in frustration. "It's not about her being in our lives, Sarah. It's about how you handled it. Throwing wine on her was, well, childish. What did you think that would solve? I don't know. I snapped back, the floodgates finally open. I couldn't take it anymore. She's always there, acting like she still has a place with you. And your family enables it. You enable it. He didn't have an answer for that. He just stood there, the frustration on his face, not easing, but no defense coming either. We slept in separate rooms that night, the silence between us louder than any argument could have been. Over the next few days, the silence between Ryan and me was deafening, but it gave me a lot of time to reflect. I'd always known my relationship with his family was strained, but I never fully acknowledged how deeply it had impacted me. For years, I had quietly accepted the constant comparisons to Emily, the subtle jabs, and the cold indifference from his mother. But now it was clear. I had been trying to fit into a mold that wasn't made for me, one that always seemed to have Emily's shadow looming over it. The realization hit hard. I had spent years trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect daughter-in-law, always hoping that, eventually, they'd accept me. I'd done everything right. Helped host family gatherings, made sure to be involved in Ryan's side of the family, and even bit my tongue when his mom and sister made backhanded comments. But none of it had been enough. Emily had a foothold in their lives that I could never compete with. And the worst part? It felt like Ryan was perfectly okay with that. I replayed the night of the dinner in my head, over and over again. Emily's little gestures, the way she touched Ryan's arm and wiped sauce off his face as if they were still a couple. I hadn't imagined it, and I wasn't overreacting. Her presence had become a constant reminder that, to his family, I wasn't the first choice. I was the substitute. But what hurt the most was Ryan's reaction. I didn't need him to fight my battles for me, but I did need him to have my back. That night, when he defended Emily instead of me, I felt like he had chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. I realized then that the issue wasn't just his family. It was Ryan. He was unwilling to set boundaries with them, and it had left me feeling completely alone in a marriage that was supposed to be about partnership. I couldn't help but ask myself, why was I fighting so hard for people who didn't value me? His family's opinion had dominated so much of our relationship, and it was starting to feel like I had sacrificed my own happiness just to keep the peace. But the truth was, I wasn't at peace. I was exhausted, emotionally, mentally, and even physically. I knew I couldn't just sweep this under the rug and move on as if nothing had happened. The wine incident had been an explosion of all the feelings I had been burying for years, and I wasn't sure I could put it all back in the box. We needed to have a real conversation about what had happened. Not just about Emily, but about our marriage and the way his family had been an unspoken wedge between us for years. If things didn't change, I wasn't sure how much longer I could stay in a relationship where I felt like I was constantly fighting for respect. For the first time, I wasn't just thinking about Ryan and his family. I was thinking about myself. Something had to change, and if it didn't, I would have to. A week after the disastrous dinner, Ryan suggested something I wasn't expecting, a family meeting. He said we needed to clear the air, to hash out all the unresolved tensions so we could move forward. Part of me wanted to avoid it entirely. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure if anything could truly be resolved. But I knew we had to try. I couldn't continue feeling like this, like I was constantly fighting for a place in my own marriage. When we arrived at his parents' house, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Everyone was there, Ryan, his mom, his dad, and of course, Emily, sitting in her usual place, as if she hadn't been the catalyst for the mess we were in. Just seeing her there made my stomach turn. I wondered if this was even worth it. How could I explain years of feeling sidelined in a single conversation? I took a deep breath and, without any more hesitation, started. I felt like an outsider in this family for years. I began, my voice trembling slightly, but gaining strength as I spoke. No matter how hard I've tried to be a part of it, I've always felt like I'm competing with a ghost from Ryan's past. And it's not just about Emily. I glanced her way, but her eyes were downcast. It's about the way I've never been given a fair chance. I could see Ryan's mom stiffen. She was always the queen of appearances, and here I was airing out years of resentment. Still, I pressed on. I feel invisible. I love Ryan, and I love our family, but I can't keep living like this, being treated like I don't matter. Emily, you may have been a part of Ryan's past, but he's my husband now, and I need that to be respected. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. I could feel my heart racing, unsure how they would respond. I had half expected another dismissal or worse, an argument. But then, to my surprise, Emily was the first to speak. "You're right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to cause problems, but I can see now that I've been overstepping. I'm sorry." Her apology caught me completely off guard. I had braced myself for a fight, for her to defend her actions, but instead, she looked genuinely regretful. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Then, Ryan's mom spoke up, her expression tight. "I never intended to make you feel unwelcome, Sarah. I guess I thought things would just work themselves out." Her words weren't exactly the apology I had been hoping for, but it was more than she had ever given before. "I'll try harder. We'll work on this." It wasn't a warm embrace or a sudden outpouring of love, but it was something. The first crack in the wall I'd been pushing against for years. Finally, Ryan spoke, his voice steady. "I should have stepped in sooner. I didn't realize how much this was affecting you, Sarah, and I'm sorry for that. I'll do better. We'll go to therapy, set some real boundaries. I promise." For the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, things could get better. It wasn't a perfect resolution, and I knew there was still a long road ahead, but for the first time, I wasn't the only one fighting. Since that family meeting, things have been improving slowly but noticeably. We started couples therapy, which has been an eye-opener for both me and Ryan. The therapist helped us break down the years of miscommunication and the assumptions we'd both been making. Ryan admitted that he hadn't realized just how much his family's dynamic was hurting me, and I had to admit that I hadn't fully expressed how isolated I had felt. It was hard to open up, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were finally on the same page. Ryan has made an effort, more than I expected. He started setting boundaries with his family, especially his mom. It was awkward at first. She didn't understand why things needed to change, and there were a few tense conversations where she tried to push back. But Ryan stood his ground, explaining that if we were going to stay married, I needed to feel respected as his wife. It felt good to have him stand up for me, and even though his mom wasn't thrilled, she's been trying in her own way. Emily has stepped back from family gatherings, which has been a huge relief. She apologized again, privately this time, acknowledging that her closeness with Ryan had been inappropriate. I don't think we'll ever be friends, but I appreciate the gesture. She's given us the space we needed to rebuild, and I no longer have to sit through dinners feeling like a third wheel in my own marriage. As for my mother-in-law, she's been trying, albeit awkwardly, to rebuild our relationship. She's made a few small gestures, a phone call here, an invitation to lunch there, and while it's still strained, it's a step in the right direction. I know it'll take time for things to feel normal, but at least now, she's making an effort, and that's more than I ever expected. Through it all, I've learned something important. I spent too long trying to keep the peace, trying to fit into a family dynamic that didn't respect me. For years, I bit my tongue, smiled through my discomfort, and convinced myself that this was just the way things were. But that's over now. I'm done being the doormat, the one who sacrifices her own happiness to avoid conflict. I've realized that standing up for myself doesn't make me the villain. Setting boundaries isn't a selfish act. It's necessary for my own well-being. And it's something I should have done long ago. Ryan and I still have a lot of work to do, but we're making progress. For the first time in years, I feel hopeful about our marriage. We're communicating better, and he's shown me that he's willing to fight for us. We're not perfect, but we're learning. We're growing. And most importantly, we're doing it together. I'm also reclaiming my place in this family, not as just Ryan's wife or someone's daughter-in-law, but as me. I'm no longer willing to compromise who I am to fit in or to avoid rocking the boat. I deserve respect, and now, I'm making sure I get it. It's a long road ahead, but we're moving forward. One step at a time, we're finding our way. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like things are finally getting better. Couples therapy became the turning point I didn't realize we so desperately needed. At first, I wasn't convinced it would help. I thought it would just be another space where we tiptoed around the real issues, where Ryan would defend his family, and I'd end up feeling unheard again. But from the first session, it was clear that therapy was different. It was a space where we were forced to be honest, even when the truth hurt. I never meant to make you feel invisible, Ryan admitted one evening during one of our sessions, his voice low and regretful. I think I was scared of rocking the boat. Emily was always there, part of my life, my family's life. It was easier to just let things continue than to confront it. His words hit me harder than I expected. For years, I'd been waiting for him to say something, anything, to acknowledge what I'd been feeling. Now that he finally was, it stirred up so many emotions. It wasn't just about Emily, I replied, my voice cracking as I spoke. It's about how your family never really accepted me. I tried so hard, but no matter what I did, I always felt like I was second best. And you never stood up for me. You let me feel that way without even realizing it. The therapist sat quietly, letting us talk through it. Ryan's face softened, his guilt clear. You're right, he said, eyes fixed on the floor. I didn't see how bad it was for you. I was so wrapped up in not causing any drama that I didn't realize I was making things worse. I'm sorry, Sarah. I should have done better. It was a step forward, a real one, but it didn't magically fix everything. My hurt was deep, and while hearing his apology gave me some relief, the scars of feeling unsupported didn't disappear overnight. Still, it was a start. We both had our flaws, and therapy was peeling back the layers, revealing just how much miscommunication and unspoken resentment had built up between us. As we continued our sessions, Ryan began to make small changes. He started setting clearer boundaries with his family, especially when it came to Emily. His mother, who was used to talking about her so casually, had to adjust. Whenever Emily's name came up, Ryan would quickly change the subject or steer the conversation back to something more appropriate. I could tell it wasn't easy for him. He had spent his whole life trying to keep the peace in his family, but he was making an effort. And that effort, for the first time, made me feel like he was genuinely on my side. Outside of therapy, we worked on communicating better. It was still a challenge. I wasn't fully ready to trust that things would be different, but I saw the small steps Ryan was taking, and that gave me hope. It wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about all the ways we had let things fester between us. Now, we were finally tackling them, and even though it was messy and uncomfortable, it felt like we were moving forward together. The biggest change was in me. I was no longer willing to just be quiet, to suppress my feelings for the sake of harmony. Therapy taught me that my voice mattered, that setting boundaries wasn't selfish but essential for my well-being. And I wasn't just setting boundaries with Ryan's family anymore. I was setting them with Ryan, too. He had earned back my trust, and he knew it. But for the first time in a long time, I believed we could do it. Things weren't perfect, but therapy gave us a foundation to rebuild from. We still had a long way to go, but we were finally moving in the right direction, one step at a time. While Ryan and I were making progress, the same couldn't be said for my relationship with his mother, Carol. Her apology at the family meeting had felt forced, like she was doing it more to keep the peace than because she genuinely meant it. In the weeks that followed, it became clear that she was only playing nice when Ryan was around. When he wasn't, I'd catch her snide remarks, subtle digs disguised as backhanded compliments, which always left me feeling like I was walking on eggshells. Every family dinner was the same story. Carol would reminisce about old times with Emily, casually slipping her name into conversations, making it impossible for me to forget that I was always being compared. I could feel her measuring me up against this imaginary standard that I'd never meet in her eyes. It was exhausting, and no matter how hard I tried, I never felt like I truly belonged. One evening, after a particularly frustrating dinner where Carol had gone on and on about how effortlessly charming Emily was, I couldn't take it anymore. As soon as we got home, I turned to Ryan, the frustration boiling over. "I can't keep doing this," I said, my voice shaking with the emotions I'd kept bottled up. "Your mom still sees me as a problem. She's pretending to tolerate me, but that's all it is, pretending." Ryan sighed heavily, running his hands through his hair, clearly torn between loyalty to me and his family. "I know it's tough," he said, "but she's trying in her own way." "Is she?" I shot back, incredulous, because it doesn't feel like it. I'm the one putting in all the effort. "She hasn't changed. She's just stopped being as obvious about it." "But it still hurts, Ryan. I can't keep being the only one trying." Ryan sat down, clearly conflicted. "I'll talk to her," he said finally, his voice tired but sincere. "I'll make sure she knows this can't keep happening." I wasn't sure anything would change, but the fact that Ryan was finally willing to address it gave me a small sense of relief. I had spent so long feeling like I was fighting this battle alone, and for the first time, I felt like maybe Ryan was really starting to understand how deeply this was affecting me. To my surprise, after Ryan talked to her, things did shift, albeit in small, subtle ways. Carol's icy demeanor didn't thaw completely, but the snide comments stopped. She didn't bring up Emily nearly as much, and though she still wasn't warm toward me, the constant tension eased slightly. It wasn't the warm, supportive relationship I had hoped for with my mother-in-law, but at least I didn't feel like I was constantly on the defensive. The changes were minor, but they were there. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could attend family gatherings without dreading every second. Yet, there was still an unspoken distance between us, one that I wasn't sure would ever fully disappear. I couldn't help but wonder if Carol would ever truly accept me, or if I'd always be the other woman in her eyes, the one who wasn't Emily. Still, for now, the peace was enough. I had Ryan on my side, and that was more than I had before. A few months later, Emily announced that she was moving away for a new job offer in another city. When Ryan told me the news, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of relief, though I did my best to mask it. I didn't want to come across as petty, but the truth was her constant presence had been a source of anxiety and insecurity for as long as I could remember. Her moving away felt like the start of a new chapter, not just for Ryan and me, but for my relationship with his family as well. A week before she was set to leave, Emily reached out to me. She wanted to meet for coffee, and while I wasn't exactly eager, I figured this might be my chance for some closure. Part of me was curious to hear what she had to say, and another part wanted to end this chapter of our lives on a civil note. After everything that had happened, maybe this could be a chance to finally put the past behind us. We met at a small cafe downtown. When I arrived, Emily was already there, looking uncharacteristically nervous. We exchanged awkward pleasantries before diving into the conversation we both knew was coming. "I want to apologize," she said after a long pause. "I've been thinking about everything, and I didn't realize how much I was interfering. I guess I just always saw myself as part of Ryan's family, and I never stopped to think about how that would make you feel." Her words surprised me. I had expected her to brush off her role in the tension between us or to dismiss my feelings like she had so many times before. But here she was, genuinely owning up to her actions. It was disarming. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied, my voice softer than I'd intended. "It wasn't just you, but it hurt. It felt like there was always a comparison between us, and that I could never really fit in the way you did. I was always fighting for space in a family that still saw you as part of the picture." Emily looked down at her cup, her fingers tracing the rim. "I never meant for it to be like that. I was so caught up in the past that I didn't realize the impact it was having on you and Ryan." "I'm sorry." For the first time, I believed her. This wasn't the half-hearted apology she'd offered before. There was sincerity in her voice, a recognition of the harm that had been done. It wasn't about who was right or wrong anymore. It was about moving forward. "I hope things get better for you guys," she said quietly, looking up at me with a faint smile. We parted on better terms than I had ever thought possible. We didn't hug, and we didn't make plans to stay in touch, but it felt like a huge weight had been lifted. Emily's presence had always been a lingering shadow in my marriage, but now, with her leaving, that shadow was finally starting to fade. As I walked away from the cafe, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. Emily's departure was a turning point, not just for Ryan and me, but for the entire dynamic between his family and me. It gave us the space to focus on our relationship without her constant interference. Ryan and I were far from perfect, but this felt like a fresh start. And for the first time in a long time, I believed we could finally make it work. With Emily out of the picture and healthier boundaries finally established between me and Ryan's family, something shifted within me. For so long, I had been consumed by trying to fit into a mold that wasn't made for me, trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, and somehow the perfect daughter-in-law, despite knowing that I was never fully accepted. In the process, I had lost touch with who I was. It started small. I decided to go back to work part-time, which was a huge step for me. Since the twins were born, I had dedicated myself to being a stay-at-home mom, but I didn't realize how much I missed having a life outside of our home. Going back to work wasn't just about earning a paycheck. It was about rediscovering my independence. Walking into the office for the first time in years, I felt a surge of excitement and nervousness. But more than anything, I felt like me again. Alongside that, I made a conscious effort to reconnect with friends I hadn't seen in ages. Between the kids, the tension with Ryan's family, and all the drama that came with it, I had drifted away from so many people. But now, I wanted those relationships back. I reached out to a few close friends, and we began meeting for coffee or lunch once a week. It reminded me of who I was before everything got so complicated. With every small step, I could feel myself regaining control over my own life. I wasn't just Ryan's wife or the twins' mom. I was Sarah, a woman with her own thoughts, dreams, and needs. And it felt empowering. Ryan noticed the change, too. He had been growing through therapy, learning to really listen instead of just assuming everything was okay. One night, after we put the kids to bed, he sat down with me and said, "I'm proud of you, for finding your voice again." His words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about finding my voice. It was about reclaiming the parts of myself that had been buried for so long. And for the first time in years, Ryan was truly seeing me, not just as his partner or the mother of his children, but as an individual. Our marriage wasn't magically fixed, but we were stronger. We had gone through so much, years of resentment, unspoken hurt, and battles we didn't even realize we were fighting. But we were starting to come out on the other side. We were learning to communicate, to prioritize each other, and to create a life that wasn't overshadowed by external pressures. The transformation wasn't just in our relationship, it was in how I viewed myself. I had learned to set boundaries, not just with Ryan's family, but with Ryan, with my own expectations, and with the world around me. I wasn't afraid to speak up anymore. I wasn't afraid to demand the respect and love I deserved. As we moved forward, I could finally see a future where I wasn't constantly walking on eggshells. I was stepping into my own power, and Ryan was standing beside me, ready to support me in ways he hadn't before. We still had challenges to face, but for the first time, I knew we were both committed to doing the work, not just for each other, but for ourselves. It's been a year since that infamous night when I threw wine on Emily, and looking back, I can barely recognize the woman I was then. That moment marked the breaking point for so many things in my life. My frustrations, my silence, my constant attempt to fit into a mold that wasn't made for me. And since then, so much has changed. Ryan and I are in a better place, more connected than we've ever been. Therapy has helped us rebuild our foundation, brick by brick. We've learned how to communicate in ways we never could before, honestly, openly, and without fear of judgment. We still have our ups and downs, of course, but the difference now is that we face them together as partners. When I look at Ryan, I see a man who has grown just as much as I have. His efforts to be a more present husband and father haven't gone unnoticed. Watching him with the twins, seeing the way he's become more involved and hands-on, has made me fall in love with him all over again. As for the twins, they're growing so quickly, it's almost hard to keep up. I see so much of both Ryan and me in them, but more importantly, I see two kids who are surrounded by love and understanding. They're part of this new chapter, too, and I'm grateful every day for the bond we're nurturing as a family. Ryan's family? Well, things are civil. That's the best way to describe it. My mother-in-law and I will never be close, and I've made peace with that. We found a way to coexist without the constant passive-aggressive tension, and I no longer feel the pressure to win her over. It's enough for me that we can share space during family gatherings without me feeling like an outsider. The truth is, I've stopped trying to be everything to everyone. I don't need their approval because I've finally learned to give myself the validation I was searching for all along. That realization, that I don't need anyone's approval but my own, has been the biggest shift in my life. I'm no longer the woman who keeps her head down, who lets things slide just to keep the peace. I've found my voice, and I'm not afraid to use it. I've set boundaries that protect my happiness and my well-being, and I've come to understand that it's perfectly fine if not everyone likes me. As long as I like me, that's all that truly matters. There's still work to be done. There always will be. But I feel a sense of peace now that I've never had before. I've fought hard to get here, to reclaim my sense of self and my worth, and I'm proud of the woman I've become. I'm no longer just Ryan's wife or the mother of the twins. I'm Sarah, and that's enough. This isn't the end of my story. It's just the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I'm in control of my own happiness, where I'm setting the terms for my life, and where I'm finally at peace with who I am. I've learned that life is full of challenges, but it's also full of opportunities to grow, to love, and to find joy. And that's a life worth fighting for.